They get about this big
Whoa.
as fully fledged adults.
Aw,
So
really?
they're really small, very cute. And the first encounter that I had with one of these chameleons was just, it kind of like blew me away. All of the 9 chameleon species that we have at the zoo were at some point confiscated from the wildlife trade.
Wow.
The tongue of the chameleon can accelerate from 0 to about 97 kilometers per hour in the hundredth of a second. It shoots forward and telescopes outwards. It's maybe also similar to this like very famous Star Wars lightsaber toy. Maybe people have that at home. It's
Some
a bit
people
similar.
might have had that at home. Welcome to Not a Biologist. My name is Alex, and as you might have guessed, I am not a biologist, but I am really curious about wildlife behavior, especially those clips of really surprising animals doing things I would have never expected. So I invite experts onto the show to help me understand the ways in which animals can surprise us and learn even more than I thought I possibly could. So today, very special, I've got a returning guest. Caroline, welcome back.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, good. Excited to be back.
For people who don't know you, who are you? Why have I invited you here?
So I'm a zoologist by training and a science communicator at the Vienna Zoo, and I'm a big chameleon enthusiast, I would say myself.
Yeah, it was right after we recorded the first episode of the show where we talked about lions. You told us about your love of chameleons, and we knew we'd have to bring you back to talk about them. Why is it that you love chameleons?
I'm just very big on reptiles in general because I think there's something like super prehistoric about them. I just love it. But chameleons, I feel like they're the like Inspector Gadgets of the reptile world. They have like all these crazy features packed into one animal, which I just think is so amazing. And at the same time, they have this like very distinctive, skeptical look about them and just the way they move. I love them. Oh, everything about them.
That's great. No, I think they are such a cool animal. I feel like they're like an iconic species, right, for reptiles, much in the way that I think lions are for cats or big cats. Yeah, I'm a big fan of reptiles as well, except snakes. Snakes are reptiles that freak me out a little bit. But in New Zealand, we have the tuatara lizard, which I really love. Got a third eye on its head. Yeah, so lizards are cool. Lizards are really, really cool. So I want to show you a clip just to get us started from one of our documentaries about the Nile and seeing some chameleons exhibiting some of that classic behavior. And you can tell me a little bit about what you're seeing, and then we'll talk about them more.
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right.
So this chameleon is moving through, I would say, scrubland. And you can see it kind of scanning the environment with its eyes. And it's most likely looking for prey, an insect in this case, I would assume. And picked quite a windy spot, I have to say. But here you can see it scanning, and most likely the other eye is scanning other parts of the environment. So they can actually track 2 targets at once. Cool. Which is super, super cool. And here it is. There's an insect. And they actually they really react to like the movement of the insects. And once they've spotted something, they actually focus both eyes on it. So they have they can better gauge the distance.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so this one just shot its tongue out.
Wow.
And caught its prey. They have this amazing projectile tongue, and you can also see it like retracting back afterwards and pulling the insect into the mouth. So they're actually very like precise hunters. They're really good at it. But obviously sometimes they'll miss as well, which is just part of it.
Part of the job, right?
Exactly. But it's just super cool how one eye scans, and then when they found a target, the other eye like swivels onto the prey object that they've seen. Wow. Yeah, that's super, super cool. Oh yeah, and this fly has probably picked the safest place when dealing with a chameleon. Yeah,
I think it's a really remarkable thing to watch because in a lot of different pieces of pop culture, you see chameleons shoot out the tongue and it retracts, and it is the thing I think people associate maybe first, if not the camouflage. Yeah. And I think it's really cool to understand how it works. Depth perception was going to be one of my big questions. If they're looking at 2 targets, how can they do that? So the fact that they kind of lock on, that's amazing.
So they actually like switch between this monocular vision, so vision with one eye, and binocular vision, which is really special in the animal world. Like not that many animals are able to do that. And for them to like change between looking for prey species and then locking onto one target, I just think that's super cool.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of freaky, but it's really it's really cool. I think it's a very, I guess, human reaction to be freaked out by things in nature, but actually it's all pretty cool stuff.
Exactly.
That just happens.
And I think it reminds me of that the way we view the world is very different than from how many other animals view the world. And we're so used to our way of seeing everything, and then it's actually not that usual to see the world as we do. And so many animals have different views of the world, and I just think chameleons kind of remind me of that because it's so obvious in them, because you obviously see the eyes swiveling and looking for different targets.
So what are your encounters with chameleons like? Do you have many of them at the zoo where you work?
So we do have 9 chameleon species at the zoo.
Wow.
And we have, or all of them are actually from Africa. We have quite a few that are from Tanzania. And the first encounter that I had with one of these chameleons was just, it kind of like blew me away. And it was just something for me that I'll always cherish. And it kind of, it made this passion for chameleons and reptiles in general even bigger. And it was with a Nguru spiny pygmy chameleon. It's a species of chameleon that's they get about this big as fully fledged adults.
Aww,
so
really?
They're really small, very cute. And it was just like walking around on my hand, and you could see it once it was like maybe trying to get out of my field of view. It just kept tilting to the side, and you can really see how laterally compressed their bodies. They're so thin when you look at them from the front, and their back is actually quite high. So they have these like kind of stocky torso. And I also think that's one of this like very funny facts about chameleons. But they can also like puff up their body. A lot of species do that to fend off predator, or to try to scare off a predator, for instance.
Wow.
They'll puff up and they'll hiss. This chameleon didn't do that. He felt quite okay with me handling him. But they sometimes do that, and I just think they're so cool. And also the way they move. Oftentimes they'll like just like move back and forth while simultaneously taking a step forward to imitate leaves that are blowing in the wind.
Whoa. And
just the way they move, love it.
Well, and so you say you have 9 different species at the Vienna Zoo. Do you have multiple of each species, or just one of certain species?
We have multiple of each species.
Yeah.
But actually, we usually, when zoos get animals, they receive them from other zoos in coordinated breeding programs. But in this case, we actually received them. They were confiscated from illegal wildlife traffickers.
Wow.
So all of the 9 chameleon species that we have at the zoo were at some point confiscated from the wildlife trade. Wow. And especially in, I believe it was 2021, we had there was a huge confiscation. It was 70 chameleons found by the authorities at the Vienna Airport.
Here in Austria?
In Austria, okay. And they brought them to us. And the thing is, at that point, we didn't know what species we're dealing with.
Yeah.
You have to try to find out what are the species, what are their needs. And chameleons are so particular about what they need, and it's really, really difficult to keep them as well. And so this was just a huge, so much work. And the caretakers they did such a great job at not only saving a lot of these individuals, but also breeding them successfully. Wow. So it's a kind of like a sad success story.
They must have traveled quite far then to be confiscated here in Austria.
Yeah, exactly. So they were native in Tanzania in the Usambara and Nguru mountains.
Wow. Is anything known about like where they were headed? Like, were they just going to be taken for private use?
I personally don't know exactly, but a lot of chameleons are caught illegally and then smuggled to the US or to Europe and then sold on the black market. That's what typically happens a lot of the times.
What does the breeding program look like?
The overall purpose is to build up healthy backup populations under human care, because these function as obviously, as the name says, a backup in case a species does go extinct in the wild. And you can then basically rewild these animals and ensure that the species isn't lost forever. Yeah. But for these chameleons specifically, actually, there wasn't a breeding program that yet existed because they were so rare.
Oh, wow.
And so we're still in the process of doing that and finding out more and more about how these animals are kept properly, how they reproduce, what their life history is like. And so there's still so much to explore, especially in many, many chameleon species.
You mentioned a few times that they're very hard to keep, very hard to look after. What is what are the characteristics of their ecosystem, and how have you replicated that for them?
Well, it depends greatly on the species, what they need. Yeah. But for the animals that we have, they are native in Tanzania, specifically in montane forests. And so they need quite cool temperatures and high humidity. So we have specialized cooling systems. And obviously, a lot of reptiles, they require UV light. So that's something that a lot of reptile keepers will know from at home. But also you have to water them with a pipette.
Okay.
Yeah, and you have to keep them solitarily because chameleons are solitary animals. They're actually quite territorial. Like if you put two males into one enclosure, they'll just go ballistic at each other and just try to hiss at each other and try to scare the other off.
Wow.
And so that's what makes it so difficult to breed them, because when putting a female and a male together, you have to get the exact right moment for them to then breed and then to separate them again, because usually they don't really like being around each other too much. And that also takes up a lot of space. If you imagine, we had 70 chameleons that came to the zoo all at once, and they all need emergency housing at that point. So first of all, you have to look, what species are we dealing with? What are the requirements of these species? How do we keep these animals alive? They come to us and they're severely dehydrated and in really bad shape. You have to get them out of these boxes or socks even that they were traded in. Yeah, they were in socks at some point. And so all of these factors come together, and it's just amazing how our caretakers were able to not only help these animals survive, but to then breed them.
Let's talk a little bit about the chameleons itself, and we'll be general, but you can pick up on any species you specifically want to talk about. We've talked a lot about their eyes, and a little bit about their projectile tongues. So how do their tongues actually work when they're hunting for prey?
So there's, if you look at the structure of the tongue, you have this like little cartilaginous bone-like structure. It's like a stick in the tongue. It's called the entoglossal process, which is just a fancy word for saying like this stick in the tongue, basically. And it's part of the hyoid bone. And this stick is surrounded by sheaths of tissues. And these tissues are called the intralingual sheaths. Again, intralingual within the tongue, so tissue within the tongue. And then on top, you have an accelerator muscle. And these intralingual sheaths that I mentioned, they store elastic energy. So in the beginning, it was actually thought that this peak acceleration and peak power that is achieved by the chameleon tongue by accelerating forward so fast is actually achieved by muscle power alone. But then it was found that the power that is generated is so big, there must be other factors at play as well. And so they found that this elastic power that is stored, this elastic energy in the tongue, is released when the accelerator muscle that is on top of this of the tissue, it contracts and presses onto these intralingual sheaths. And then the sheaths, once they slip off this process, this entoglossal process, they kind of spring forward, a bit like a spring. And it shoots forward and telescopes outwards. It's maybe also similar to this like very famous Star Wars lightsaber toy. Maybe people have that at home.
Some people might have had that at home.
It's a bit similar, and that's how this like super fast energy release is achieved. And that's why the acceleration is so fast. And then the slower process is pulling the tongue back in with the retractor muscles.
How fast is it actually? Like if you measure the speed?
So it's really difficult, but they say the tongue of the chameleon can accelerate from 0 to about 97 kilometers per hour in the hundredth of a second. At peak values, it's the fastest recorded acceleration among any amniote movement. So the amniotes are reptiles, birds, and mammals.
Is that something that they learn, or is like how to use that muscle, or is that something like instinct for chameleons?
So chameleons, once the juveniles hatch, they're basically on their own. So they have to know how to hunt. It is something that they have to be able to do from birth.
But practice makes perfect, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay, so you have 9 species that you're able to study and observe at the zoo. How many species are there in the world that we know of?
Right now, there's 228 described chameleon species. And most of them are found in Africa. But there's also chameleons in Asia and even in Europe. So
Really?
there's a Mediterranean chameleon, or also called the common chameleon, which is found in the south of Portugal, south of Italy, also south of Spain and on Crete. And it was also introduced to other parts of Europe, but those were that's the native range. And actually, almost 2/3 of all chameleon species are found on Madagascar. So Madagascar has a huge diversity when it comes to chameleons. It's actually like a huge range. So
Wow.
the largest and the smallest chameleon, for instance, are both from Madagascar.
Oh, okay.
The largest chameleon is the Parsons chameleon.
Uh-huh.
It can reach about 68 centimeters in length. So it would easily fit on this part of my arm. That's pretty big.
Yeah.
And the nano chameleon, which is the smallest chameleon, hence the name, it would actually fit on the tip of my thumb.
No, fully grown?
Fully grown.
Okay.
They're tiny.
See, I thought this was tiny, the one that you mentioned
the
earlier.
Nguru spiny pygmy chameleon. Nope, there's even smaller species.
Wow. Okay, we need to find a photo of the nano chameleon and like superimpose it on my thumb there, because that is, there we go, we got it. That's fascinating. And they're both on Madagascar, but their lives must be so different. Their prey must be completely different, because I imagine a nano chameleon is not eating the same things as... Yeah.
So they're very different. Chameleons also inhabit so different habitats.
Yeah.
So they're found in rainforests, in montane forests even. They're found in scrubland, or some even live in the leaf litter. And there's even a chameleon species, that's the Namaqua chameleon, that's found in the desert. It lives on the ground in the desert.
Wow.
Which is just wild to me.
Completely different.
Yeah, exactly. Typically you imagine chameleons living in trees and in foliage, and then there's just this chameleon that lives on the ground in the desert. It's just wild.
What defines a chameleon opposed to other lizards and other reptiles?
Chameleons are a family of reptiles. They're called Chameleonidae in Latin, in case anybody was wondering.
Yeah, we have a lot of Latin friends.
And they have a bunch of really special characteristics. So as I mentioned, the torso is quite stocky, so they're laterally compressed. So they're very thin if you look at them from the front.
Yeah.
They have these high backs, and then they have these pincer-like feet that go like this. They're very good for climbing, for instance. They have prehensile tails, which is super cool, or many species have prehensile tails. And then just their vision with the seemingly independently moving eyes, then this color change that they exhibit to a certain degree, but also their projectile tongues. These are actually all characteristics that make chameleons chameleons and what make them so special.
So how does a chameleon's color camouflage actually work?
They have their skin consists of multiple layers, which is quite ordinary, I would say. But they have pigment cells in their skin that contain pigment, obviously. And the cells, they're yellow pigment cells called xanthophores. There's red pigment cells called erythrophores. And additionally to these pigment cells, they also have specialized cells that contain guanine crystals. These cells are called iridophores. And what these crystals do is they reflect light. And in chameleons, they actually have two layers of these iridophores. They have shallow iridophores that are said to reflect light, or visible light, and deep iridophores that reflect infrared light. So they actually aid in thermoregulation.
Ah, yeah, okay.
And chameleons also have melanophores. Those are like these dark pigment cells. We might know melanin. That's the when we tan, that's what gives us our darker tans, for instance.
Sure.
So we have something very similar. And in chameleons, these crystals that they form a mesh within the iridophores, within these cells. And so when a chameleon is at rest, the individual crystals are very close to one another. But when the chameleon is excited, the crystal net, it kind of widens, and there's more space between the individual crystals, and this affects how the light is reflected.
Right.
And so this, in combination with the pigment cells, can create all different types of colors. And it wasn't until recently ago that they actually found these two layers of iridophores within the chameleons, and they found that this is actually a very, very unique feature that they have.
And do certain species of chameleons change colors at different rates, or are they less colorful or more colorful?
The color of a chameleon depends greatly on where it lives. Obviously, you have chameleons that are more green, that live in foliage, for instance, or you have oftentimes species that live in leaf litter or more barren areas. Maybe they're more beige or brown.
Such a complex system, but I guess
it is,
lots of biology is just complex systems upon complex systems. Let's talk a little bit about reproduction of chameleons. So how can you tell a male chameleon and a female chameleon apart?
This depends greatly on the species as well, as you would have probably guessed.
Yep.
But for instance, in Mount Kenya, three-horned chameleons, the males as you might guess by the name, have 3 horns, but the females don't. But then there's also species where both sexes have horns. And for instance, in my personal favorite, the Nguru spiny pygmy chameleon, males have this like protruding, elongated nose-like structure on their head. And females, in the females, the nose is just a bit smaller. So that's how oftentimes you can tell them apart. But in a lot of chameleons, it's not actually that easy and straightforward.
And so how do chameleons reproduce? As reptiles, do they lay eggs or what?
A lot of chameleon species do lay eggs. So the females will lay the eggs into the soil, for instance, and then just basically close the hole where they laid the eggs in. But a lot of species also bear live young.
Wow.
So the Jackson's chameleon, for instance, does bear live young. And I think that's just one of these things that also like kind of disrupts this notion that we have about reptiles in general, that all of them must lay eggs. But when there's actually a lot of reptiles that don't do that, and chameleons are just one of those examples as well.
And what happens, they bury the egg, for example, with those that do lay eggs. Do they hang around or do they just leave?
They just leave.
That's hilarious.
That's it.
They just bury it and they're like, all good, my job here is done.
Exactly.
Good on them.
They're just like, have fun, bye.
We've gone a long time without talking about the actual color changing effect, which is, I think, very, very well known, at least when people think of chameleons. What is that actually like, and how good is it, at what people expect it to do?
Yeah, so contrary to popular belief, they're not able to match any background that they're put in front of. Chameleons, they typically, when they're at rest, they have this like greenish or brownish coloration just for camouflage. And when they change color, it's mostly about their mood or communication, or even thermoregulation. They do some color matching to some extent in order to camouflage, but it's mostly about them, these different moods that they have. So when a chameleon is excited or angry or stressed, it will have these very bright colorations often to fend off a predator, to fend off a potential rival, or even to woo a female. But for instance, females that have already mated will try to get rid of males by showing it through their coloration. They often have these more mottled browns and will hiss at males just to show that they're not interested. So it's a lot about communication and mood, actually.
So they're less like spies and more like mood rings.
A bit, yeah. They're the mood rings of nature.
That's great. I had no idea, because you get the sense that they're being sneaky, avoiding predators and stuff, but it's actually just super angry today, so I'm going to look completely different.
Yeah, so they're really well camouflaged on their own as is.
Yeah.
They typically have these colors to match their environment. The way they move is very hard to spot, specifically for me or for us. We usually look for something that moves kind of fast, and chameleons, they can move very fast if they want to, but usually they're very slow and scanning the environment with their eyes and so on. And so they're just extremely cryptic and difficult to spot in the wild.
Okay. What does a typical day look like for a chameleon? Like, what's happening, when are they active, and what are they doing?
I would describe it as maybe pretending to be a stick, then pretending to be a stick for a couple more hours, maybe scanning the environment for food, walking, looking for a potential mate, who knows? And then when they do find an insect, for instance, catch it with my projectile tongue, and then continue to look like a stick or a leaf maybe.
Wow.
And so that's typically how they spend their day. They're trying to be as little conspicuous as possible, obviously, because other than hissing and puffing up a bit, they don't really have that many defensive mechanisms. So when they fail at trying to fend off a predator through this method, it's over.
That's really sad.
Yeah, but some species, they also do, when all else fails, they'll just drop to the ground.
And play dead,
Yeah,
or
it's like an exit strategy.
Oh, okay. What is the reality? We've talked a little bit about trafficking. What threats do chameleons face?
A lot of chameleons face threats through climate change, just like a lot of animals do, and habitat loss, which is a big topic on Madagascar as well. And obviously, illegal wildlife trafficking is also an issue.
In one of our films, illegal wildlife traders release chameleons into the wild so they can feed on natural food before being harvested later. Is that something that's a common practice, that you think?
I've never really encountered it, but this is also referred to as ranching.
Ranching.
I know that it does happen. It's when, in this case, illegal wildlife traffickers set an animal free in an area. Usually it's a non-native area, so the animal can establish itself, maybe breed, maybe eat some food there, and then they'll later take it out again and sell it for profit. And this has happened a lot with chameleons, and this is actually how they were introduced to the US, specifically to Hawaii and Florida, for instance.
But what can people do at home to look after chameleons?
The first thing I would say is like climate protection is species protection. So whatever helps the climate will also help a lot of different species, not just chameleons. So using public transport, maybe focusing more on plant-based meals is a big one.
Yeah.
Trying to avoid fast fashion, maybe going to a vintage or a secondhand store instead. Just little things like that you can do in your daily life, and the decisions that you make really shape the future. And for chameleons specifically, people can also just learn about them. Watch this video till the end.
That's great. We'll put that right at the beginning.
Exactly. Because people can only protect and love what they know.
Yeah.
And I feel like that it's so important to learn about all of these different species that are just so fascinating. And so that's a big one. And if you do want to act or do something, there's a cool organization called Wildlife Madagascar. They do a great job at also educating people about chameleons. And they actually introduced the World International Chameleon Day. It's in May.
Okay.
It's like a public holiday for me. And you can also donate to them, check out their website, and learn about chameleons.
Well, thank you so much for taking us through the world of chameleons. I don't think I could have ever anticipated how wide the variety was, and I think I'm going to remember the nano chameleon for a very long time.
They're very cool.
Yeah, and I'm quite jealous now that you get to see them so often then at the zoo.
Yeah, it's like whenever I have a bad day, I'm like, can I please have a look at the chameleons? No, I'm just kidding.
That would be a pretty good work privilege, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing not just about the chameleons, but also about how we can, look after them from afar and be more knowledgeable about how our actions impact wildlife, even all the way, in Africa or elsewhere around the planet. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for watching Not a Biologist. We'll be back again next month with another full episode about another surprising animal. So thank you for watching.